Change is hard, not because you're doing it wrong, but because it asks something of you. Welcome to Change is Hard, a podcast from the Leadership Lab. I'm Audrey Blair, and this is a space for leaders who are learning how to sit with uncertainty, make decisions without rushing, and grow without losing themselves in the process. We'll talk about the moments that stretch you, the conversations you keep avoiding, and the quiet shifts that change everything. No noise, no pressure, just honest conversations about becoming the kind of leader and human you actually want to be. Let's get into it. Hi, welcome to the episode. Just a quick intro because I am having a conversation with Lianne Lyne, the CEO of Mind Tough, an executive coach and leadership development consultant. And we are having a conversation about lots of things around leadership. Particularly, we're going to touch on how she went from professional dance to sports psychology to executive coach. And we're actually going to talk a little bit about some of the things that are misunderstood around mental toughness and dispel some myths around soft skills. So please enjoy. I will say there's a little bit of an audio issue, some echoing happening, hopefully not too distracting. But all in all, there's a lot that we're going to cover. So enjoy the episode, and I'll see you next time. Hello, Lianne. Welcome. How are you?
Audrey, I'm very well. Thank you.
Thank you. Listen, I'm going to try really hard to not, and we've spoken many times, and I don't usually fall into this, but I know people do that annoying thing where they try and mimic your accent. Is that right?
It has happened.
What is it with us Americans always trying to mimic others' accents? Because you don't walk around trying to mimic mine. I don't know. It's a really strange thing.
I don't know what it is. I remember going for dinner once years and years ago with my husband and one of his clients, and her husband actually spent the entire dinner speaking in a Dick Van Dyke Cockney accent, and it was kind of annoying.
That's hilarious. Yeah. Okay. Well,
Don't do that.
I won't do it. I won't do it. I won't do it. It's just sometimes the pull just feels so strong. And for as many conversations as we've had, I don't know why suddenly I felt the need to do that. So, okay. Thank you. I just need to call that out. So,
I'll check you. Okay, I'll
yes, thank
mention it
you.
if you're doing it.
So, I appreciate you coming on. I appreciate the time. And I'm excited to talk to you about what you're doing in your business. So, actually, before we get started, why don't you just take a minute and just share just a little bit about you, and we'll talk a little bit more here. But just why don't you introduce yourself to us?
Hi. My name's Lianne Lyne, and it's Line, not Lynn, because that gets confused quite often, and then I get called Lynn. So, Lianne Lyne, I'm CEO of Mind Tough. We're an executive coaching and leadership development consultancy. And I would say that the name Mind Tough started because I am a Buddhist and well practiced at mindfulness. And as a prior sports psychologist, a lot of the focus of the work that I did was in mental toughness. So it's a combination of mindfulness and mental toughness is where that
Okay.
comes from.
Ah, interesting. Interesting. Because I bet most people get that wrong. So when they think mind tough, that might not be the first thing that comes to mind. And I know we've been talking recently, and now feels like the right time for that, the mind tough aspect, because we're living in such a, I say it now, we're living in such a, we use this word VUCA, right? And I know in our field, the volatile, complex, uncertain, ambiguous, but it feels like that so much more now. And a lot of times when that's happening, people tend to hold on and go, well, I just need to work harder, or I just need to have more grit, I just need to have more resilience to keep things moving forward. But I'm not sure that that's the right answer. And I know you don't believe that as well. So answer me this. When you say mind tough, what do most people get wrong?
I can imagine and anticipate, because it's funny that you should say that we need this more than anything, because at this moment, because I actually had a conversation with a former colleague of mine called Cindy Gallop, and she said this is exactly what's needed right now in this moment. And I think that people think this concept of mental toughness is really about sticking to things, being gritty. I think they think it's like a masculine, male dominated concept. What comes to mind actually is, when I left school, I I trained as a professional dancer at the sister school of the Martha Graham School, and it was an incredibly difficult environment, abusive. And I remember my ballet teacher, who was a former Royal Ballet dancer, used to say, if you cry in my class, you will leave and you will never come back. And he obviously saw challenge accepted on my face because he abused me for the next year. And I think people think it's that idea of no matter how much abuse or screaming in your face that you can endure, that you will be steadfast and get on with it. But that just allows other people to be abusive.
And you never learn how to teach other people to treat you either. Yeah, I worked in a situation like that where there was a boss like that. He was not my boss, and I think he saw on my face, you will never speak to me that way. And you know what? He never did. Never. And he was a principal at the company. And it is so true that you don't have to endure that for any reason at all. And sometimes, and I'm not, and that's different if you're someone who in a conversation and things get heated and there's mutual respect and we're having a conversation, that's fine because I'm kind of that person. I can get passionate about things, but not this overlording, you will take whatever I give you aspect to things. Yeah. So wait a minute, I want to back up because you said you left school and were a professional dancer and now you are an executive coach. Tell me a little bit about that journey and even just thread in how some of this, how you created this, what you used from your story to even get to where you are now.
It's interesting because I love to talk to students about my career path and kind of early entry women, especially about my career path, because there's a perspective, I think, in the United States especially, where we feel as though we do our degree and this is how your career goes and that's the expectation. And in fact, that's my career path.
Mm-hmm.
And I've done all kinds of different things. And, I as I said, I trained professionally in dance. Probably only did that for a year or so after I left dance school. I had a love-hate relationship with it, and hate won. And so I'd been brought up in advertising. My dad was in print advertising. I wanted to go into film, and so he introduced me to somebody who helped me to get my first job in film production. And so that's what I moved into. I moved into working into advertising in advertising agencies as a producer. And then I had my daughter, and I didn't want to give up work full time, but it was very expensive in London to afford a nanny. And I figured, why pay all of my salary to a nanny when I can take some time to bring up my children? So that's what I did, took a break, a career break. And
Mm-hmm.
when my son, my youngest, was one, I wanted something more. I love being a mother, and it wasn't enough for me. I lost my identity. And so people used to talk to me at the school gates, and I thought, I've got to get paid for doing this. So I did a degree in psychology, and my final module was in sports psychology. And my professor said, you just get this, you should do it. And I went, okay. So I did a master's in sports psychology. And I was so fortunate because the moment I left my master's degree, somebody approached me and said, I want you to come and work at this football club, the real football. Um, and it was a
Oh, nice dig. Okay.
It's the beautiful game. And it was a Premier League club. So I worked there. I was the only woman. It was an experience, best of times, worst of times. Uh, and I just decided I committed to just work one season.
Hmm.
And then in the midst of this, I fell in love with somebody who lived in America. It was actually the person who helped me find my first job in advertising. And
Interesting.
we moved after 3 years. We decided, let's commit to this relationship. And I moved here with my children to the United States. And I had to change direction again. Got a job at Wayne State running the sports sociology program. And then I got a job in an advertising agency being their cultural director and did some internal coaching there. And after a couple of years, thought, okay, I don't want to work for the man anymore. I'm going to start my own company. And so that's how I got here. So it sounds meandering, like how do you go from dance to producing to sports psychology to executive coaching? And I realized that everything I've ever done is focused on performance in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah, that's a good pull through on that. But I would imagine, though, at every new opportunity or new thing you stepped into, I want to talk a little bit about because we work with leaders, we talk with people who make transitions and pivots and do things. Tell me a little bit about as you were moving into each of these new roles, how did you deal with, or did you have any discomfort, or was it just a really smooth transition for you every time? Talk to me a little bit about what that was like for you.
Very uncomfortable. I'm somebody that likes to, let's just give it a go and see what happens.
Mm-hmm.
Take a risk. And it's a calculated risk. These are not dumb risks, right? I take calculated risks and think, I'm going to give this a go and see if I can do it. But it is incredibly uncomfortable. And I think the most important thing about recognizing that often it's a physical feeling of discomfort is that's when learning's happening.
Yep.
And that's a positive thing. Recognizing even when you make mistakes, and this is actually a part of mental toughness and part of the mental toughness model, is being able to take risks. So this is part of challenge, take risks, calculated risks, and then learn from mistakes. So
Yeah.
having a learning orientation, what have I learned here? It's really important to be able to do that in order to be able to not just keep going, but be able to pivot when necessary, recognize when a change of direction is needed. And it's not even when a change of direction is needed, it's also when a change of recognizing when a change of direction is desired. And if you're feeling too comfortable, then perhaps it's time to throw a hand grenade in, which is what I do, and look for the next opportunity. It's interesting because I think that people don't realize that, people strive for competency. They want to be competent in what they do, and they think that that's success. But I think that idea is a bit skewed. And we have 4 levels of competency. We start being unconsciously incompetent. We don't know what we don't know. And then we move into consciously incompetent. And this is a
Yeah.
really uncomfortable place to be. It's a steep learning curve. Then we move into being consciously competent. We know what we know. We're still having to be intentional about it every day. And then we move into unconsciously competent. We don't even have to think about it. We live and breathe it. We're in flow, in a flow state. It's so rewarding and so effortless, and yet it's not challenging anymore.
Yeah. Because it also gets a little bit boring if you're honest with yourself.
Yes, yes. So you start looking for the next opportunity. And what you don't realize in that moment is what you're asking for is to move down the levels of competency so that you are consciously incompetent. We get there and it's horribly uncomfortable, So sometimes people get pulled back into that unconsciously competent piece where I'm just going to do some of the work. The work pulls me back because that felt really good and really rewarding and I was good at it. And
Yeah.
really, what we should do is fight that urge and lean into the discomfort because we're learning something new. I mean, even the top CEOs in the nation feel this discomfort. Even they move into consciously incompetent. So, for example, you move from CEO of Boeing to CEO of Ford. You've never worked in the automotive industry before. You don't really understand it. Right? You're a CEO, but actually, you don't know the people, you don't know the culture of the company, you don't know how it works, you don't know the business. You've got a lot of learning to do. You are consciously incompetent. So everybody experiences that. So it's about what do you do next when you feel that discomfort?
Well, part of it is what you feel next, but even before that is recognizing that, as you said, when you're looking for that next thing, and this is something that comes up so much, and clients go, I thought that when I got to this level, I would be more confident or more of this or more of that. And really, all it does is magnify some of the insecurities that you already have. But to your point, you are actually very specifically and deliberately putting yourself back into that period of learning and figuring things out. And for some people, they feel like, oh, I've done something wrong. For some leaders, they think maybe this is a sign that I shouldn't be here, versus no, this is a sign this is exactly where I should be. And I have to start that learning process all over again. And they go back into, especially if they're leading a team, they go back into what's comfortable, the things that they're doing, the day to day, the operational. And then they start taking tasks away from the team that they are meant to be developing.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting as we're having this conversation that some of my career choices have actually I have unconsciously put myself in this position time and time again because even as I think of being a producer, I made an intentional decision to work in commercials because it was interesting. And when I having this conversation, it makes me realize that it was interesting because one week I'd be doing an animation piece, another week I'd be doing special effects, another week I'd be doing comedy, another week I'd be doing radio, right? So the genre of the work that I was working, I was getting a massively broad experience in types of genre of filmmaking. If I went into movies, I would end up with a specialism. These are the types of movies that I produce. That didn't interest me at all. And of course, now, as an executive coach, every client presents another learning opportunity. I learn every day from my clients. I don't live their day to day.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know them. I have no right to put myself physically into their experience. I need to be an objective partner, a non judgmental partner, but it gives me the opportunity to learn every day.
Where I know part of my journey into this space, coming from a consultant's background, there was a lot that I needed to unlearn in order to be really good at what I do now. Because from a consultant's perspective, you are the expert in this space. You are the one that's supposed to know what you're doing. You are the one that's supposed to have the answers. And a lot of times leaders feel that pressure as well. And so then they continually put themselves in that space where they are excellent at it, really good at it. But it actually keeps them from being, there's a book that talks about your big leap year and talks about how do we get into our genius zone. That's when we really feel the challenge, but also fulfill the most. But a lot of people tend to stay stuck in that comfortable, here's what I know, I'm going to keep doing the same things over and over again, versus how do I continue to challenge myself, not making it an issue, but learning along the way. And part of that is even in how often we might define what fear is, because we're so focused on getting it right the first time. people don't have time to learn anything anymore. People don't have time to make mistakes anymore. It's really a wild time. These are just things that come up so often, and they're so afraid to lose something that they're willing to risk their own growth. They're willing to risk so much because I'm just going to stay right here. And so, when does it actually start hurting people when they're like, I'm just going to hang on? I'm just going to, you know, not work forward something different? When does it become hurtful to you and to your team?
You know, that component that you talked about, the unlearning, in order to learn, we often have to unlearn something. And that's really important. And I'm unlearning every day because part of being an expert can lead to rigidity. And this paradox that you talked about, this, we're fearful for our jobs, for our living, for our company, for putting a foot wrong, for making a mistake, is at odds with the expectation of innovation. People are expected these days to innovate constantly, but you cannot innovate in a culture of fear.
Yeah.
It's impossible. So this is so a leader's, I think, primary responsibility, first of all, is to develop the next level of leaders, but to provide a safe space to enable that innovation. And a safe space can often require being open to other perspectives. So grit gets in the way when you are not open to other people's perspectives. This is the way that we should be going. We should
Mm-hmm.
keep moving in this direction. And I'm not open to anybody else's perspective. We're just going to keep going in this direction, even though people around you are telling you, no, we need to do something different. You mentioned being, having a particularly, I don't know whether this is the right way to say it, but a particularly strong level of VUCA at the moment. And so many, ever since the pandemic, during the pandemic, people had to just cope with, they had to be gritty, right? Just get on, keep the train on the tracks. We're having to do more with less, with fewer resources, fewer people, less money. And instead of us having a recovery after the pandemic, it seems that organizations thought, wow, they did really well. Like, they did really well. This is great. They can keep going. And now we've got an economic downturn. We need to make more cutbacks. And and I think that many leaders are, with very good intent, are showing and demonstrating an enormous amount of empathy for their teams. Empathy, EQ, part of mental toughness, right? But the trouble is, once they jump into their team stuff, rather than looking at it from an objective perspective and finding out for themselves, when they jump into it and place themselves in their team's emotions and they're making up stories and making assumptions about what's going on, they're getting in their way. It is with good intent, but when you challenge a leader by asking them, when you were given a stretch assignment, or when you were given an opportunity to do something you hadn't done before, or lead a large project for the first time, how did you feel? And they often say, okay, I mean, it was difficult because I felt a bit overwhelmed with so much going on, but it was really exciting to be thought of or considered, or, okay, so why aren't you doing that for your team?
Mm-hmm.
It gives them a whole different perspective on what it means to look after their team. There's a difference between caring for them and looking after them and protecting them.
Right. Right.
Creating a safe environment is protecting them, but you should be enabling them to be able to speak up, to be able to share their thoughts without ridicule or punishment, right? To be able to have an open dialogue, to be able to talk directly and to take risks and fail.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, and stop making assumptions about what you think they can and cannot do, about what their capacity is. Part of their growth is them figuring that out for themselves and pushing back and going, you're allowing them to push back and go, okay, well, you're giving this to me. Help me then to prioritize, or help me to figure out what I can let go of. So we have to not be afraid to step in, try things, have conversations, maybe getting it wrong, doing something differently because, oh no, what might happen? And again, it's back to some of those stories that we tell ourselves, well, if I do this, it's the slippery slope. If I do this, then it's going to get out of control. Well, maybe, but probably not. Out of this,
Fear around there is I'm not going to have control. There's one component, and it's kind of built into different parts of any mental toughness model, but it's not explicitly spoken about. And I think it's one of the most important leadership skills. And we do not do enough to develop this. And it goes back to this storytelling that you were talking about and making assumptions. And critical thinking is, I think, the most important leadership skill. And it can be learned and it can be taught, but it's not expected explicitly. And critical thinking enables you to be able to take multiple pieces of information and then decide what to do with that information. I think so many leaders, I mean, every coaching conversation I have involves a story. Every single one involves a story. And it can often lead people to go down a pathway of behavior, i.e., this is what I'm going to do next, based on a story,
right,
not on the facts of the situation.
right, 100%, because they're relying solely on their perception of the situation versus how do I broaden and bring in other perspectives into this situation.
That's what psychological safety within a team is about.
Right.
Bringing in multiple perspectives, and then you can co-create a solution that is
Yes.
more effective, perhaps, than the solution that you've created in your head, when you may not have all the information that you need to make the right decision.
You rarely do.
It's
Wild.
actually a gap I identified and why I developed a program around it that really is around developing critical thinking skills, because I see them are underutilized so often. Because when we talk about finding the right solution, listening to multiple perspectives, even before that comes, are we addressing the right problem? Like, what's the real issue? And often we're not even addressing the right problem.
So you've got to figure out, well, what are we actually dealing with here? Yeah.
Self-awareness around your own stories, around your own lived experience, the people that you've encountered, the people that are around you that might bring up people that you've encountered in your past, your values, there's an enormous amount of self-awareness that's required in order to be able to work effectively in teams.
Yeah.
And I think this whole, everybody having a voice in the room, I think that leaders often get concerned that they'll be swell. Everybody has to have an opinion. We all have to agree. But actually, it's the opposite. You need to be able to disagree. You need to be able to get to the heart of the real issues. And just investing a little bit of time in that helps you to move much faster.
Yes.
It doesn't slow it down, it speeds it up.
And instead of teaching people how to adapt in situations, you get people that just assimilate. A lot of times people walk into the room and they look around and go, what's everybody else doing? I'm going to do that thing. So if no one else is, I have a different idea, but no one else is saying having a different idea, so I'm just going to shut it down and not give that different idea.
But we don't know that somebody else doesn't have a different idea because we
Exactly.
haven't put it out there. And everyone's sitting there thinking, well, I've got a different idea, but I'm not going to say it.
This might need just some contrarian thinking here. The other thing I think we get afraid of is we get afraid of telling people no. Appreciate that idea. That's not going to work in this situation, but thanks for your input.
Yeah, I mean, going back to building tough teams, this critical thinking, psychological safety, the ability to be able to disagree without taking it personally, The ability to be able to manage your own and other people's emotions, recognizing what's needed of me right now in this moment. Those things are so important for tough teams. You really should be able to be focused on, okay, what's our purpose? What are we trying to do in this moment? Focused on that and not how we feel, right?
Yeah.
Whether we're taking things personally, the stories that you're creating in your head, all of those things get in the way. It's just the ability to be able to, and I think it's more than grit, of course, because, there's a lot of EQ involved in this, but the ability to be able to be aware enough and stay absolutely focused and present in the conversation so that you're moving together in the best direction that you can.
And you mentioned that part of this, some of this is why you created the program that you created. So talk a little bit about your program and how you help to bring some of this awareness, how you help to solve some of this. Talk about what you're doing in your business.
I mean, our program, Tough Stuff, it is so interesting. And it came out of this idea that, what coaches work on, what coaches help executives develop are soft skills. And I think it's time to retire the phrase soft skills
Okay, I'm agreeing.
because
What?
it
Okay.
it makes people, it gives the impression that they're just like a nice to have. They're not necessary. And they are more critical than, numbers, ROI, metrics, measurables that are easy to be able to measure performance, which is what we tend to default back to. It's really difficult to measure so-called soft skills. So I want to retire the phrase soft skills because it's the tough stuff. Because the reason that people don't do it is because it's hard. It's really
Yes.
hard and it requires getting uncomfortable. And so I developed this program to help people learn the importance of recognizing that the people around them are human beings, fully formed human beings, not just the person at work. That as a leader, you have an impact on the people around you, and they take that home and they talk about you when you're at home. There's a program in England called Vera, and she has somebody who reports to her. She's a detective inspector or something like that. She's a policewoman, and she has somebody who reports to her, and their kids call her Mussolini, right? Because that's how the parent talks about her when she gets home, right? So understanding what's the impact that we have on not just the people I work directly with, but the people in their lives, and then the people in their lives. It's really important to start measuring impact on the people further and further out in this kind of ecosystem that we exist in. It isn't this big, it's this big. And developing critical thinking skills, which is the most important component, that we got to stop telling stories. We've got to recognize when we're telling stories. I've got to stop making assumptions about people and things. Maybe not stop, because sometimes assumptions are necessary for perhaps putting together a plan. There are certain assumptions that we need to build into any plan. But on the whole, when it comes to dealing with other people, we need to stop storytelling and start finding out what's really going on. But that's hard. It's uncomfortable.
Or at least recognize when you're storytelling and go, okay, here's my story. What else is out there? Because it's impossible to stop because we all have to have context for things. But yes, how do we recognize and what might be someone else's story? What might be another perspective? How do we broaden our perspective? And I always give this example of your perception. It doesn't make it wrong because someone else has another perspective. It's you're seeing different sides of the one truth. And the more perspectives you have, the closer you can get to actually the truth of whatever it is that's going on. Okay, well that's fantastic. And you work primarily with organizations. And how can people find you, and where are you? How are you out there?
Uh, Physical location.
I don't think you want people knocking on your door.
I'm not going to give you my address, but my physical location. I'm sure it's completely obvious to you that I'm based just outside Detroit in Michigan.
Oh yes.
It's always the least likely. People are like, what? And I am online at www.bemindtough.com.
Be
And that
mind
is how
tough, as in be be
BE,
mind tough.
BE,
Okay, got
bemindtough.com.
it. I
Do
love
it.
it.
Do it. Be
That's
mind tough.
fantastic. So Detroit normally isn't on my list of places to go. Partly because it's in Michigan and I'm from Ohio and I'm a Buckeye and there's all the things that go along with that. But I am aware of the Henry Ford Museum that's there that I keep hearing all this amazing stuff about. So I'm going to make a trek up there and come and hang out with you and use all your free stuff to get into the museum in order to take a tour there. But for
It's
sure,
definitely, definitely worth a trip.
I love it. Okay. Well, thanks, Lianne, so much for hanging out with me today and talking through some of these things. And we will definitely talk more, and I'll keep in touch with you on how things are going with Mind Tough. And Mind Tough is the company, but the program is called Tough Stuff. Is that right?
That's
Okay.
right.
Because it's hard stuff, and that is the part that keeps people in their corners, head down, not interacting because they just don't want to deal with it. But that's what we need in order to do all the things that we're trying to do. And so I appreciate that. So fantastic. Well, thanks for hanging out with me today, and I will see you around.
Always a pleasure, Audrey. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
You're welcome. Hey, if something in this episode resonated, I want you to know you don't have to navigate it alone. This is the work we do inside the Leadership Lab, building capacity, strengthening decision making, and learning how to lead with intention through change. If you're curious about working together, you'll find more information in the show notes. And if not, that's okay. I'm glad you were here. I'll see you next time.